All right. Good morning and hello on multiple fronts this morning. My name is Mitch Babcock. Welcome back to the PT on Ice Daily Show from the Institute of Clinical Excellence. It's Fitness Athlete Friday, and we are coming live to you on both Facebook, Instagram Live. So thank you if you're checking us out in real time this morning. Good morning to both of you. And then also thank you for all of you who are downloading the podcast and keep us in your regular rotation, whether it's on your way to or from work. Maybe it's while you're shuffling the kids around at sports or whatever it is. But we thank you for downloading and making a few minutes for us. Fitness Athlete Friday today. I wanted to wrap a little bit about the nuances of powerful hip extension, right? And so in our world, we do this a lot, right? So we just kicked off our next 8-week Essential Foundations cohort. That started this week. So shout out to all of you that are in that cohort right now and listening. And we're also going out this weekend, and myself, Alan, and Zach will all be on the road this weekend talking about fitness athlete stuff. And inevitably, this will be a topic that we spend a lot of time on is hip extension. How do I get it? I've heard it said it's this mythical creature of a movement, right? It's really hard to really express in real time, especially under barbell conditions, loaded barbell conditions. How do I get hip extension? How do I get more of it? How can I improve it in my athletes that I'm working with, right? This really shows up most explicitly during the snatch and the clean. So we're talking about those real powerful movements, whether that's your hey, Will, good to see you, dude. Whether that's your high school athletes who are using maybe power cleans and power snatches as a way to develop power for their sport. I think in terms of football, I think in terms of hockey, lacrosse, those sports where you're trying to generate power, we're going to utilize those Olympic weightlifting movements, right? You're also going to see it a bunch in our world, which is the CrossFit sector, right? Trying to work on whether it be the squat snatch, the power snatch, the clean, the squat clean, the power clean, whatever it may be, that we're really trying to get athletes in tune with a real powerful hip extension moment that's going to create vertical motion on the barbell, getting height on the barbell for that athlete to then be able to pull themselves under the bar. That comes from the biggest powerhouse in the body, which is the hip pelvic complex, right? So getting athletes to understand, how do I really turn that loose? How can I really get more aggressive hip extension is a big challenge. And I can kind of rat out Jeff a little bit. We were working together and he's like, man, Mitch, how do I get more hip extension? And at the time, like, he was really trying to drill the technique down with some lighter weights on the bar. I was like, well, at some point, Jeff, we might need to put some more weight on the bar, right? We might need to force the body to have to create more power by putting more of an external load on the bar. And very rarely in our technical progressions is that really the answer, right? Usually we're trying to strip weight off the bar, get an athlete to move better in unloaded conditions before we start to give them load. But in an instance like creating real powerful hip extension, that might be one area where we need to add a little bit load on the equation. So today, real quick, I just want to break it down, what we're trying to look for, why it's important, give you a few skill transfer exercises that we like in the gym. If you or your athletes are struggling with hip extension, I feel, excuse me, a sneeze coming on. I knew it was there. Okay. If you or your athletes are struggling with powerful hip extension, then some of these skill transfer exercises might be able to help you out, and some cues that we use to try to make athletes a little bit more proficient in that. Again, when we're talking about hip extension, right? Now, this matters because it's not just thrusting your hips at the bar. So let's take, for example, the snatch. Let's start with the snatch. We're trying to get the bar to go from ground to overhead, which means we need to create quite a bit of vertical flight on the bar through my hip extension moment to try to get the bar high enough that I can get under it and support it with a lockdown arm overhead, right? That's a long bar path distance for it to go, and it needs an aggressive hip extension moment. And a lot of people think that they need to thrust their hips at the barbell, that they need to throw their hips forward to try to create that, or like what I call like a pseudo hip extension, right? They're trying to get what needs to be done. But what ends up happening as a result is the bar leaves their center of mass, right? We've created a big horizontal displacement of the barbell. It's out in front of me too far. And now I have to make too many compensations to correct for that because I thrusted my hips at the bar rather than getting the true vertical hip extension moment on the barbell that I'm looking for. And that's a result of the bar not being in proper place relative to the body when you created your hip extension moment. So a lot of these exercises and skill transfer stuff is a lot to help athletes understand how to create hip extension. But in terms of the snatch and the clean, you also need to make sure the bar is in the correct position, right? Because I can get you to open your hips up and I can get you to get tall or jump to the ceiling and all the cues that we're going to talk about. But if the bar isn't in the right position, then the movement is still going to look bad, right? So make sure that the athletes are still they're sweeping the bar into the hip and getting themselves into a position that once you turn their hip extension loose, the bar can travel vertically instead of horizontally, right? So in terms of the snatch and the clean, those two are vitally important. How do I get athletes to just get started? So if we're looking at like a novice athlete, how do I get some more hip extension out of them early? I try to cue it as simply as possible. I'll take them from the high hang position, which if we're unfamiliar with that, that's just standing very tall and a slight dip of the knees, and you're basically just sliding down a wall 2 to 3 inches, right? You're not going down very far. You're just putting a slight bend in your hips and in your knees. From that high hang position, I will just tell them to jump as tall as they can, because that jumping motion will create inherently the hip extension that we're looking for. So trying to tell an athlete an external focused cue, or rather an internal focused cue like extend your hip, is really hard for novice athletes to grasp. They're not sure, where is my hip even, and what do you even mean by extending it? But if you just tell them in that slight dip position to jump as high as they can or as tall as they can get, they will extend their hip inherently to do that motion. So that's usually where I'll start with athletes. It's just like, hey, let's work on jumping and getting as tall as we can. Like if I was going to measure your total height of the top of your head, like that's how high I want you to jump, because inherently that's going to force them to squeeze their butt, squeeze their knees, and get as tall as they can and create that hip extension moment that's going to help create vertical trajectory on the bar. So that's really my first place. Now, as athletes start to progress in their barbell knowledge or expertise, right, I'm going to take that cue and start to refine it a little bit, right? One caveat, guys, is there's a lot of different ways to coach weightlifting. So I understand if some sectors and some coaching spheres coach differently and don't coach it with certain cues in mind because of a certain rationale, and that's totally fine. For me and my athletes, what I've found to work really well is that once I get them to start jumping vertically, I want them to start thinking more back, right? I want them to jump back slightly, or I want them to extend their shoulders and throw their shoulders to the wall behind them. And that's going to help to create more hip extension moment at the hip and what we call uppercutting the barbell, right? So as the barbell's coming up, as my hips scoop underneath and I throw my shoulders back, I can relatively uppercut the barbell and create more of a powerful vertical trajectory on the bar, right? So now we're starting to get more nuance. I can't tell a novice athlete these cues. It's just going to be too much too soon. We just need them to learn how to jump with weight in hand. Then as they're progressing and they want more power to be unleashed, if they want to figure out how to get 300 pounds to their chest or 200 pounds overhead, they need to start understanding some of the nuances. So I need them to extend even more. I need them to throw their shoulders slightly back, get their hips to come up and under the barbell before they create that powerful hip extension moment. Some weightlifting coaches like Jared Ennerton, who we follow a lot of his stuff, he's a great resource on Instagram too. If you guys don't follow him, just at Jared Ennerton. He'll talk about performing almost a backflip. So you want to think about backflipping. Like, so that's different than just jumping for max height. That's jumping for power, but also extension, right? So he'll think about backflipping at that moment of truth when we're trying to get powerful hip extension to come out. So a couple different subtleties in cueing and correcting to try to get an athlete to actually utilize hip extension, but making sure that we know where the bar is in space relative to the body so that the trajectory is vertical and not horizontal. Okay, so what about a few skill transfer exercises? What things do we utilize a bunch? Let's start from the very basic and progress our way back to the Olympic lifts. If an athlete is just very new to understanding lumbopelvic function, hip extension at all, just going with a classic like kettlebell deadlift or like a kettlebell RDL rather is a great movement, right? I just want you to slowly unlock your knees, but not do any more bending of the knees. And I just want you to bow forward, right? Keeping your back flat, just hinge forward and then stand up. And then eventually I want them to stand up with a little bit more power, a little bit more aggressiveness through that powerful hip extension, right? Because I don't want them just to do the slow motion of hip flexion, hip extension, hip flexion, hip extension. I need them to learn that I need to create power in that motion to get me back into an extended position. So I'll use like a kettlebell RDL as like a nice skill transfer exercise. And obviously you can use a barbell RDL for this as well if that works better suited for what you have going on. But those are two nice movements. Another one that's overlooked a lot in the Olympic lifting weight world, but utilized a lot elsewhere, is a barbell hip thrust. This is where you're sitting on the floor, your shoulders are elevated resting against a bench or a box behind you, and the barbell is across your lap. Your feet are up on the floor in like a hook line position, and you're basically just driving your hips up in the air and lifting the barbell up, coming to an extended position or a neutral hip extended position, and then back down. That barbell hip thrust, if you're really looking to create strength and power there, you can load that up relatively heavy on that barbell. Guys, you may be able to go up to 225 on that barbell, maybe more, and really work on a powerful hip extension at that, from a flex position. Can I powerfully extend my hip, open my hip up, and just train that pattern in something that's, parallel to the floor instead of standing upright, perpendicular, right? So it's another way to try to change angles, change modalities, but focus on just aggressive hip extension by utilizing a barbell hip thrust in that motion. The other really nice one is just going to an old-fashioned kettlebell swing. Yeah, I know some of you are probably sitting here going, you want hip extension, do a kettlebell swing. That's what it teaches. It teaches aggressive hip extension. And you're absolutely right. And one thing that I would say is go heavier on the kettlebell swing. Because what I see all too often is people scaling themselves down in the kettlebell swing, and then they're using a lot of arm. They're using a lot of extremity motion when they really shouldn't be. Remember, in that kettlebell swing, the arms are basically just cables. They're just holding onto the kettlebell for you. They shouldn't be doing any lifting, really, if we're truly focusing on hip extension and like what we would call like a Russian kettlebell swing at just eye level, right? So scale up a little bit, add a little bit more external load, like we talked about earlier, to really focus on priming that aggressive hip extension, right? If I was normally going to swing a 53, maybe swing a 70 or something heavier than that, right? Because I want the hip to have to work hard. I want it to have to make an aggressive hip extension moment to create some flight on the kettlebell, right? And if the kettlebell is too light, it doesn't have to do that. We're not forcing it to do that. So again, one area where a little bit more external load might help teach the corrective pattern, which is aggressive opening of the hip for sound hip function there in our triple extension. Okay, so go a little heavier on your kettlebell swings if you want athletes to learn how to squeeze their butt aggressively and open that hip up. And the last one that we really like was getting into our skill transfer exercises. And this is talked at the CrossFit Level 1 as a foundational movement, and it gets overlooked a lot, but it's a sumo deadlift high pull, right? So sumo deadlift, which is we're in a wider stance than our normal conventional deadlift, and high pull, which means that we extend the hip and we pull the barbell up to around chest level, right? Chest level, like near the collarbones, right? And what we're focusing on there is a barbell movement that starts to transfer us into our Olympic lifts, that starts in a deadlift position from the floor, where we create an aggressive hip extension moment and create vertical trajectory on the bar. And we don't have to think at all about catching it in the clean or catching it in the snatch. So it allows us just to hone in on sound hip function. Extend your hip aggressively, and then pull the bar high, right? Elbows should be out to the outside, right? So a sumo deadlift high pull as a barbell movement to start your athletes back into skill transfer exercises next to the snatch and the clean. When we're working, and this is the last part here today, guys, when we're working with athletes in the snatch and the clean, what movements specifically to those, what regressions and progressions or accessory movements can we do to help the snatch and help the clean? And the one that works the best, and we just did a bunch of this last week at our barbell club here at the gym, is from the blocks. And the reason being is what I mean from the blocks is, right, we're elevating the floor surface. We're bringing the bar closer to the middle of the body. We're bringing it up. And where I had them yesterday was just above the knee. And where they could focus on there from the blocks is setting up in a position where they felt good tension in their hips, where they felt like their hamstrings were coming on tension a bunch. And there's no momentum to be able to help you out here. There's no, jumping it from the floor so I can start to early arm bend and pick up speed. There's nothing. It's coming from a static start just above the knee. So in a matter of a few inches, from the time it gets from your knee to your hip, you've got to create an aggressive hip extension moment very quickly, right? We've got to get that hip open. We've got to get those shoulders back, and we've got to get tall if that bar is going to take any sort of flight at all. So we worked a lot of block training in the power clean and the power snatch last week, and athletes were raving about how they felt better bar contact. They'd never felt their hamstrings in that position before. They felt more powerful, more aggressive. The bar felt easier. It felt like it just floated upright. And those are the things you want to be hearing when athletes are starting to tap into that big powerhouse, which is the hips. When they start to learn how to extend those hips aggressively, that's what it should start to feel like. This should feel effortless. The bar is just floating in the air, right? So work on a block work. If you have an advanced athlete who maybe you analyze their videos and you're like, you're just not really opening your hip as aggressively as you should, And realize, guys, that if they're not tapping into that powerhouse, they're looking elsewhere, right? Which means they're pulling heavy with their arms. They're doing an early arm bend, or they're aggressively upright rowing the bar, which is going to cause their arms to be slow, which maybe means their front rack looks really slow, or they're catching the bar in a bad position, or they're not quite getting the snatch high enough, and they're having a hard time locking out that snatch. And that's as a result of not tapping into the powerful hip extension. So if you get them skill transfer exercises, work from the blocks, work with some sumo deadlift high pulls, or some aggressive kettlebell swings to help them get back in that moment and then create that powerful hip extension you're looking for, can really make the difference for them, right? Okay, that's about 15 minutes, just a little bit over. We'll keep it there because it's Friday. We've got a flight to catch. We're flying out to Minneapolis this weekend. Zach is going to be down in Charlotte. We've got 2 fitness athlete live courses this weekend. So keep an eye on the Instagram page. We're going to have a lot of stuff probably going up over there this weekend. So if you want to see what we're doing in the gyms that we're in, have a look. As far as fitness athlete division is concerned, you can still jump into the advanced concepts cohort. That kicks off on the 20th. January 20th, there's still a few spots remaining. So if you're interested in nuances of weightlifting, advanced gymnastics, and being that true hybrid coach clinician in your community, then jump into that advanced concepts course. We'll be starting that January 20th. As I mentioned, the 8-week Essentials Foundation is already underway. You can check for the next one, which will be coming up in March. Otherwise, we've got a busy Friday and a flight to catch. So I hope you guys have an awesome one in the clinic. Reach out with any comments, questions, or concerns, and we'll see you guys back here Monday, same time, same place. Take care.